This is a step-by-step look into the 3 mistakes that I wish someone had told me and what to do instead to go from having no choice but to speak English, Kiswahili, or another more widely used language with your children that's not their local language. Simply because you and your husband are from different tribes and you don't speak each other's languages, or you don't know which language to teach your children, to being able to speak 1, 2, or even more of the local languages in your mixed family with your children, and having your children deeply appreciate these languages and want to pass them on to their own children when the time comes. And you might be wondering, how is that possible? But this is based on actual experience and proof. It is very detailed, it's very specific. I've spent years creating this process to make sure it is very precise and effective, and I have based it on actual results that my clients have received. It includes the exact steps that helped Millie's children to go from speaking only English to speaking Luganda, Rusoga, Ruchiga, and Rutoro. They are the same steps that helped Masivo's young learners to go from speaking only English to speaking Kiswahili, Kikuyu, and Luo. And they are the same steps that helped Maryanne and Florence to go from not teaching their children their own languages, because traditionally children belong to the man's clan and should learn his language, to then receiving their husband's consent to teach their children their languages. And now their children proudly speak Luganda and Luo. This is the system that I'm sharing with you in this video. Does it sound good? Okay. The difference between those success stories and the moms who stay stuck, and this is very important to remember, because you could have all these 3 steps together and still stay stuck, but these moms applied these steps in the right order, whether they knew it or not, and they took imperfect action instead of waiting for perfection. Now, if you're ready to break through that feeling of overwhelm and to get the exact blueprint that I used to help my 3 children start speaking Luganda, Ruchiga, and Rutoro, I have a free event coming up called the Unlock Your Children's Mother Tongue Experience, where I'll be guiding you through this process live to make the key shift that you need to make as a busy Christian mom to help your children start speaking their mother tongue straight away, deeply appreciating it and wanting to pass it on to the next generation. Just type "I'm in" the comments below, and we'll send you that link to save your seat. Now, let's get into the video. Before we go into this 3-step process, you need to know what you do not need in order for this to be successful. Number 1, you do not need to speak the language properly or even at all. This can work even when you don't speak the language well. You don't need to have a lot of time. You don't need to be a teacher, and you don't need to hire a teacher. You don't even need to move to the village. It's nice if that is one of your plans, but if it's not something that's possible for you right now, or something that you don't have in mind, it's okay. This process still works exactly as your life is right now. And I know all this because I've tried most of these things that I've mentioned. I've made all these mistakes. I have been the test subject for discovering exactly how this process works best. I was stuck in that cycle of starting and stopping and not understanding what was keeping me from moving forward. But the truth is that when it comes to our children learning their local languages, perfect grammar and lots of vocabulary are for sure, but identity is for generations. Most of us are focusing on the wrong things entirely because we feel like we need all these things, and our path forward becomes very unclear and our mental focus becomes clouded. Let me know if you can relate to that. It's total chaos up here because we are busy doing all these things that are taking us off track even when we don't know it. So now that we know what you don't need, let's go into the 3 mistakes to avoid and what you need to do instead. I'll share what they are first, and then we'll go into a bit of detail on each of them, together with what to do instead. So the first mistake is being unclear. The second one is upholding hidden barriers. And the one is something I call starting at the top. Those are the three mistakes that you need to avoid in order to be successful with helping your children learn their local languages in an intermarriage family. So let's start with the first one, being unclear. A big misconception most of us have as parents is to think that because we learned our mother tongue organically, that it's going to be the same for our children. But the truth is that for most of us, our children are growing up in environments that have much less exposure to their local languages, if not none at all, compared to how we grew up. And so them learning their local languages is not going to just happen by itself the way it did for us. We have to be super intentional about making this possible in their lives. It's one of the things we need to think about from the very beginning, even as early as when we are starting our families as husband and wife. If you've ever wondered what to talk about in the dating phase, this is one of the things to talk about. For most of us, however, we realize much later when we've already had children and they've already started speaking, and then we are not sure which language or languages we want them to learn. But the good news is that it's never too late. What we want to do instead is to have what I call a clarifying conversation as husband and wife about which language or languages you want your children to speak. And this is very important, why you want your children to speak those languages. And what this does is that it gives you as a family a clear picture of where you're going together in this area of your lives, and you're able to move together as a team. This is what to do instead for this first mistake of being unclear. And this level of clarity is what happened for Millie, whose story I just shared, who has a big blended family of 4 languages, and she had no idea where to start. After having this clarifying conversation with her husband, they realized that if they did not do anything about this, their languages were going to end with them. And so as a result, her husband is now teaching the children Ruchiga as she teaches them Lusoga and Luganda, and they're learning Rutoro from their community. It's the same thing that happened for Florence, who was not teaching her children Luganda, which is her language, because traditionally children belong to their father and should learn his language, which is Ateso. But after having this conversation with her husband, she was surprised when he asked her to teach the children Luganda, her language, since she was more able at the moment. And it was important for them to learn a local language early, whether it was his language or not. And because it was important for their sense of identity and belonging and self-confidence, ultimately this would set the foundation for them to learn more local languages later, which also included his language, Ateso. And now her children are proudly speaking Luganda, and they are interested in learning more about their Ateso heritage. And when I had this conversation with my husband, I ended up being the one to teach our children his language, Luganda, while my side of the family teaches them Ruchiga and Rutoro. So you can do this in any way that works best for your particular family. So you might be asking, how do you actually have this clarifying conversation? There are 4 steps, and I'll go through them right now. So the first one is to reflect before you go into this conversation on which language or languages you would want the children to learn and why is it important for you. What's the deeper reason why? Step 2 is to go into this conversation knowing that no matter what response you receive, God is your source. So go into this conversation without being attached to receiving a yes. And know that God works in mysterious ways, and He can work through any response you receive to help your vision come to pass, regardless of whether it was the response you expected or not. And then step 3 is, as you go into the conversation, share your vision with your husband. Let him see the bigger why. Why is this important? Share that with him. Let him into your inner world. Let him see that this is coming from a deeper place. And then step 4 is to make a clear request and ask for something specific. And then receive whatever response you get with grace and with gratitude, and know that God works all things together. So let me give you an example of what this can look like. You could say something, for example, like, I've been thinking about how important it is for our children to be able to speak to relatives when they visit or when we go to their village, and for them to be proud of who they are and where they come from. Now you've shared your vision, and now you make a clear request. And so I'm wondering if you could start speaking to them in your language while I speak to them in my language, so that they can learn both languages. This is, for example, if you want them to learn both. So that's what the clarifying conversation looks like, and that is what to do instead for the first mistake. If this sounds like what you've been needing and you'd like to go deeper, I have a free event coming up where I'll be guiding you live through this process. It's called the Unlock Your Children's Mother Tongue Experience, and we'll be making the shift that you need to make as a busy Christian mom to help your children start speaking their mother tongue straight away and deeply appreciating it without you needing to have more time or to speak the language well or at all. Simply type "I'm in the comments below, and we will send you a link to save your seat. Or send "I'm in" to the number on your screen on WhatsApp, and you'll be in. The second mistake many moms make, and that you absolutely must avoid in order to be successful with this process, is upholding hidden barriers. Now that your vision is clear and you are in agreement with your husband, you might feel like it's time to move into action and start helping your children learn their local languages. But what I've seen from guiding dozens of moms through this process is that it's not yet time. There's one more thing that you need to do in order to be successful, and that is to identify and address these hidden barriers. That is what to do instead of this mistake number 2. And what are these hidden barriers? These are invisible, larger cultural agreements we've been inside of, ways that we've been socialized to act in society, unspoken agreements we have made about what is or isn't acceptable in society. For example, you can't help your children learn their mother tongue on top of the unspoken agreement that local language is inferior to international languages and it's therefore embarrassing and shameful. It's not possible. Or on top of the unspoken agreement that local language is backwards and is doomed to go extinct, so we might as well forget it. Or on top of the unspoken agreement that your children are .com kids who don't fit in with their extended family because they can't relate to normal life. You absolutely must first address those hidden barriers first before you move forward, in order to then be able to succeed with this process. I'll share a quick story with you. One time, my son came back from school and he was no longer responding to me in Luganda. And so eventually I asked him, what's wrong? And he said to me that my teacher told me not to speak vernacular. I was immediately transported back to my own school days and how ashamed I had felt of speaking vernacular well into my 20s because of this simple instruction from my teacher. Let me know if you can relate to this. But when I was able to identify and address that shame that he was feeling and to expose it as being a false social construct, he was able to see that for himself, and that very day, he started responding to me in Luganda again. So how do we identify and address these hidden barriers? We ask. The first thing we do is acknowledge what they are feeling. The second thing is to share your story. The third thing is to share some context. And then finally, ask them a thoughtful question. So let me take you through this process with this story about my son. So the first thing I did was I acknowledged what he was feeling. I can imagine how confusing and even ashaming that must have felt for you. I'm sorry you had to go through that. The second thing I did was I shared my own vernacular story with him. So I asked him, can I tell you a story? And it's important here to ask for permission to share that story, because your child's whole understanding of the world has just been turned upside down. They don't know what's real anymore and what's not. And so it's helpful for them to feel like they have a say in where this conversation goes. So ask, can I tell you a story? And who doesn't want to hear a story? So I shared my vernacular story with my son and how I overcame that shame of speaking vernacular. And he was very shocked because as far as he can remember, I've always spoken Luganda and Ruchiga and Rutoro. He does not remember me not speaking these languages. So you can share a story that is the exact scenario that your child is going through, or a story of something that is relatable to what they are going through. The key is that it needs to be a story of how you overcame that obstacle. And what this does is that it creates something called the ancestor effect, which is a phenomenon that scientists have studied, where when people learn that their ancestors overcame certain things, they automatically feel able to overcome those things themselves. So this is a very important part of this process. And in a way, this is how folktales are born. This is how we need to keep evolving our culture for it to remain relevant. Tell them your stories. And then the third thing is I shared some context with him about how it came to be that teacher can say don't speak vernacular. I shared with him that once upon a time, the English people of England wanted to extend their territory to Buganda, the land of the Baganda. And the only way they could do this was to extend their territory into the mines of the Baganda. And one of the ways they did this was to tell children to not speak Luganda and to speak English instead. And they did this in schools where children went to learn. And so years later, the English have left Uganda and Buganda, but school has remained the same. And so teacher is not telling you to stop speaking vernacular because it's bad. She's telling you to stop because that is what schools started doing when the English came to Uganda. It's important to note while you're sharing context that the world is more complicated than our children might be able to understand at this moment. And so it's important for you to share what they're able to receive at this age and leave the more gruesome details for when they are old enough to understand and process and recover from what happened. Our goal here is just to help them understand how the world came to be the way it is right now. So finally, I asked him a thoughtful question. I asked him, based on the interesting riddles you've learned in Luganda and the amazing stories you've had and the rich culture you've witnessed, is Luganda really bad? And this gave him a chance to think about it for himself and to think critically, having contexts and knowing that this is overcomable. He was able to make sense of it for himself and question this larger hidden barrier that had said that Luganda is shameful, and expose it as false based on the proof he had that it was not shameful. In fact, it was rich. So it's important to always be sharing this kind of proof of the richness of your children's culture with them in an ongoing way, so that they can have this proof when, not if, but when this hidden barrier of shame shows up. And I'm going to show you how to do that as we look at mistake number 3. The third mistake most of us make in this process is what I call starting at the top. When we picture our vision in its fulfillment, we might see things like our children speaking their local languages fluently. We might see them having intellectual conversations in them. We might see them being able to read and write them, even writing books in them and about them. We might see them teaching it to other people when that time comes. So what can happen when we are starting to help them learn these languages is that we can start at a level that is more advanced than our children are able to manage. And this happens unknowingly. We can do things like expecting them to remember words the first time, expecting them to pronounce words correctly the first time, expecting them to be able to sustain long conversations strictly in their local language for long periods of time. And what this can do is that it can make our children feel like they are insufficient in this process, and it can make them feel overwhelmed. At the same time, it can make us feel discouraged when they're not able to do these things and to feel like there's no hope for them to learn. At the same time, this process ends up feeling impossible because this approach requires more time than we have all day, every day. What we need to do instead is to start small. In fact, we need to start at the very bottom with short and simple but powerful phrases that can fit naturally into the daily routines that already exists in our lives with our children, while also giving our children lots of permission to do this imperfectly and to speak their local languages imperfectly. This makes this big transition feel doable for you, for your children, and for the entire family, because it gives your children confidence to start speaking their local languages, because there's space to fail and learn and keep trying and trying again. It creates a strong foundation for them to become advanced as they grow with speaking their local language, since they speak it all the time. And it also helps you become consistent, since this way does not require you to stop everything else that you need to do in your day, as these phrases fit naturally and seamlessly into the routines that already exist in your day. So that is starting small. This is what happened for Millie, whose story I shared earlier. She had been trying to find time to help her children start reading and writing Luganda. And with everything else she had going on in her day, it was just not possible. When she would speak to them in Luganda, they would respond in English, even when they understood what she was saying. The younger ones didn't understand anything at all, and all this was made worse by the fact that she was homeschooling them in English. When she decided to start small, her children learned how to greet in Luganda at different times of the day. They learned how to greet in Ruchiga. Her 9-year-old learned how to speak Rutoro while cooking with the maid. And her 6-year-old suddenly started playing in Rutoro with his playmates. So how do we start small, practically speaking? There are 4 steps, and I'll go into each one of them. The first one is what I call the 5-phrase formula. So think of your day as a grid that goes from morning to night. You want to find 3 to 5 short, interestingly thought-provoking phrases that naturally flow with your day, that you can use throughout the day with your children, where they have the opportunity to respond. The first one can be in the morning. The second one can be in the afternoon, and the third one can be at night. If you're able to start with 5 phrases, or you're adding more as you get more comfortable with this process, the second one can be in the mid-morning, and the fourth one can be in the evening. The key with these phrases is that they have to be short and simple, but really thought-provoking, and they have to be used at moments of emotional connection with your children throughout your day together with them. They can be nicknames. It can be a proverb that applies to a lesson you're teaching them in this season of your lives. Or you can add those in with time as you get more comfortable with this formula. It's entirely up to you. It could be good morning in the morning, and then a nickname in the mid-morning, and then it's time for lunch in the afternoon, and then welcome back from school in the evening, and good night. at night. Those are phrases that already exist in your day and you use them every day already with your children. Now we just need to use them in the language you want them to learn. The learning outcome here, the goal, is not for your children to learn or understand these phrases. If they do, that's good, but that's not the goal. The goal here is for them to just repeat the responses, repetition, imperfect but consistent repetition. As they learn each response to each phrase and say that response back to you. Sometimes there'll even be different responses for one phrase depending on different situations. The more they repeat those, the more they'll be able to actually get comfortable with the idea of speaking their local language, as they'll start speaking it straight away and on a regular basis. And this is also what will train them with time to start recognizing those small details like pronunciations, like intonation, sounds, and other such things that will help them eventually start pronouncing the words perfectly. Another important key here is to start with teaching just one language per person or per parent. This is what is not commonly known as the one person, one language method, OPOL. And I discovered this method accidentally in my own childhood as I was reflecting. And I realized that my mother used to speak to us in Ruchiga and my father used to speak Rutoro, and I only ever heard these languages from them. They never used to mix them up. And so from a very young age, I was able to tell these languages apart from each other. And eventually I realized my mother's people spoke Ruchiga and my father's people spoke Rutoro. And it was easy for me to tell these languages apart. Because what happens with this method is that the people who speak this one language to your child become that sort of visual aid for your child, that real life visual aid that they can use to tell this language apart from the rest. The second step here is to share with your children the deeper literal meanings of the 3 to 5 phrases you have chosen, and to share these in a way that opens their understanding up to the rich depth that exists in their local language and the culture it comes out of. This is what will help them to gather that proof of the richness of their local language, to challenge those hidden barriers we talked about earlier. For example, good morning. Good morning, for example, in Uganda is mwasuze mutya, wasuze otya. And literally translated, that means, how did you sleep? How was your night? It's not just a phrase that someone says quickly and moves on with their day without knowing how you actually are. This is a question where I'm genuinely asking how you slept. If you didn't sleep well, I would like to know. You have the opportunity to share with me. Another example is, let's say lunch is ready. In Uganda, that is mujetulye. And that's not just an announcement. Literally translated, it means come, let us eat together. It's not an announcement that food is ready, but it's an invitation to come and catch up in the middle of the day and check on each other. How have you been doing? And let's share this meal together. So these deeper literal meanings open your child up to understand that there's something deeper and richer here that I have not known. And they will become curious. They'll be inspired. They'll want to know more. Omugulanda, for example, is a nickname that I incorporated into this process with my then only child when I was starting this journey. And in English, it means firstborn, but its literal translation opened my son's understanding up to more than I could have ever shown him about the rich depth of his culture and his local language. I share the full story of what happened there in this video. If you'd like to check it out, I'll also link the description below. And so with this second step, it's best to start with emotionally engaging or inspiring phrases, not instructions like bring me a cup as we usually do, which is where I also started. Save the instructions for later in the process when you've already set the foundation in this deeper way, and then the instructions can come then. What this will do is that your children will naturally begin to associate their local language with emotional safety, and new and interesting concepts. The learning outcome here with this step isn't for your child to just know what the words mean, but it's for them to care what the words mean. In the words of educational philosopher Charlotte Mason, it's not about how much the child knows, it's about how much the child cares. And this is what can and will lead our children to deeply appreciate their local languages and want to pass them on to their own children when the time comes. Millie, whose story I shared earlier, put this so well. She said, "Sometimes we forget, but a seed has been planted." The third step is to implement steps 1 and 2 into the things that your children are interested in. If your child is interested in cooking or in sports, what are the ideas and the concepts and the skills and the knowledge that exists in their local language on those topics? As you bring these in, your children will naturally become even more fascinated with their local language and culture, and they'll become self-driven to learn it even in your absence, which is what we want to ultimately happen if these languages are going to outlive us. At the same time, this is going to help them refine their unique gifts with the wisdom of their local language and culture, which will be very rare in their time, and this will help them stand out in the future marketplace. So that's a bonus right there. And the fourth and final step in this process is community. It's to bring steps 1, 2, and 3 into creating a mother tongue practice community with your children around this process, together with other people. This is even more important if there aren't many people around you who speak the language that you're teaching, or if you yourself don't speak the language well or even at all. But before you start reaching out to people who know the language, there's one important thing you must know first. Not everybody who speaks the language you want your children to learn can serve as part of an effective mother tongue practice community for your children. You need people who understand and appreciate the value of your children's local language and the culture it comes out of, and who are able to express this to your children consciously and subconsciously. What will happen as a result of this is that your children will become curious about these people, and they'll wonder what they know about their local language and culture that your children don't yet know, and they'll volunteer to learn from them. Your children will also build the confidence to start speaking their local language out in public with other people, in community, all because you started small. And if you'd like to discover how to do this in a way that flows with this busy season of your life and honors your physical energy, watch this video where I share how to synchronize this process with the predictable rise and fall of your physical and mental energy each month. If this sounds exciting and you'd love to go deeper, I have a free event coming up called the Unlock Your Children's Mother Tongue Experience, where I'll be guiding you through this process live. We'll be making the shift that you need to make as a busy Christian mom to help your children start speaking their mother tongue straight away and deeply appreciating it. Just type "I'm in" the comments below, and we'll send you a link to save your seat, or send "I'm in" to the number on your screen on WhatsApp, and you'll be in. So those are the top 3 local language mistakes to avoid in your intermarriage family and what to do instead. Leave me a comment. Let me know what your biggest takeaway has been and what you're excited to try. I read every comment, so I'm excited to read yours. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.